Hi and welcome to my latest video. Today it's sort of going back to basics, but basics with a particular purpose in mind, and that is close-up photography. Now there are lots of different accessories that you can buy in order to focus really close to small objects, no matter what they might be. So what I thought I would do today is talk about a couple of things. First of all, we have a set of extension tubes. I'll just get rid of the box. I was only showing off really just to show you that I managed to buy a perfectly mint set, including box and even instructions, ridiculously, which of course nobody ever bothers to read. They're very straightforward things to use. What you will always find when you buy extension tubes, and this is true no matter what camera fitting you have, and it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about film cameras or digital, they will work equally happily with either. With digital you do have obvious advantages in as much as you can check the results immediately. Obviously with film it's very much more hit and miss. The main, particularly with very basic 35mm single lens reflex cameras, without through the lens metering, you're going to have to know the exposure increase that is required. Otherwise your results will come out underexposed, because every time you extend the distance between the camera lens and the film plane, you're reducing the amount of light that can pass through from one end to the other. So it needs a longer exposure time. Now extension tubes, fairly flexible things, not as flexible as a set of bellows, which give you infinite adjustment and a greater magnification range. But these are pocketable. You can easily pop this into a corner of your gadget bag, so if you are out in the field you can at least do some close-up photography, which probably with a bellows you wouldn't want to put those in your gadget bag. You are certainly going to need a tripod or certainly a firm base on which to use the camera when you're using bellows. The focusing is critical. So extension tubes, although less flexible than bellows, much more compact and portable, and when you buy them they do come as a set of 3. These particular ones are M42 thread, so they'll fit any number of cameras with the Pentax Praktica screw thread lens mount. These particular ones made by ACO, prevalent, very popular in the 60s and 70s. ACO made a number of good photographic accessory items. Automatic extension tube, 2-fit Pentax, made in Japan, and you can probably see that they come in 3 different lengths, and these are pretty much standard. The shortest one gives you a 10mm extension between the lens and the camera body. The intermediate one extends that to 16mm, and the biggest one doubles that up to 32mm. And you can either use them individually or you can combine all 3 to get maximum magnification. So what I've done, I have taken 4 photographs on my digital camera to illustrate the results you will get using each of these tubes individually, and then a final one showing you the magnification you get when you combine all 3 tubes together. And what I've done is to utilize the Zenith E camera, which I droned on about a few days ago, and I have, just let me zoom out a little bit here because I'm going to need a bit more space in which to show you what's going on. So the Zenith E, I've used the Helios lens from it, but to explain how things work I'm going to demonstrate it using the film camera body and the Helios 44-2 lens. Very straightforward. So all we do is take our first extension ring pop it onto the camera body like so, and then our lens screws onto the front of that. Now the minimum focusing distance of the lens isn't changed. That might sound obvious, but I thought I'd point it out anyway. So focus it as close as you like. In the case of a digital camera, you can visually check the exposure by altering the aperture ring. You would obviously need to set your camera on manual or at best aperture priority to get it to expose correctly for you. And then it's a case of moving the camera. Just let me use the box as a target. All you would do is move the camera either closer to the subject matter or further away and observe in the viewfinder when it's at its sharpest. Obviously, when you're dealing with close-up work, depth of field is much reduced. So it's important to be as accurate as possible with your focusing, and wherever possible, stop your lens down. Okay, that will give you a slight increase in the depth of field. And on the screen now, I will put the image I have taken of a humble £1 coin here in the UK to show you the magnification you will get when you combine the 58mm Helios lens with the 10mm extension ring, and this is on an APS-C size sensor. Okay, so that's coming up next. Okay, so now we've done one photograph with simply the 10mm extension. So we'll keep the extension tube on the camera, and now we will add in the, I do beg your pardon, we'll take that one off as well, and we substitute that for the 16mm extension. There we go, and we'll put the lens on the front of that. So you can see we're getting longer. So we've gone from the 10 to the 16mm extension tube. If you keep your focusing distance at its minimum, same idea applies. Move your camera backwards and forwards, away from and closer to your subject matter until you get optimum focus. And the image that I'm going to put on the screen now shows you the magnification that you get with the 16mm extension. Next is the 32mm extension tube. Quite a big difference, and exactly the same process. And the image that I'm going to show you now will be taken with this setup: 58mm Helios, 32mm extension tube. And finally, we will add all three extension tubes to our camera body. There we are. It's starting to look a little bit ridiculous now, isn't it? But it still works, and it works very well, and it's exactly the same procedure on your digital camera. Set it up, get your subject matter, and you can vary the focusing primarily by moving your camera closer in or further away to the subject. Fine focusing you can change slightly by altering the focusing ring on your lens. And you will notice that the exposure has increased over those 4 photographs. This last one that I'm putting on the screen now is with this setup: 58mm prime lens, 32mm, 16mm and 10, which I make to be 58mm overall extension between camera lens and camera body. So there we are. That illustrates the use of the humble automatic extension tube set. Very common on the market, particularly in M42, Pentax Praktica thread mounting. They're all over the internet, and if you spend more than £10, I'd be amazed. These are mint and boxed. It's not essential to have them mint and boxed, obviously. They're a very simple device. These are automatic diaphragm. You can see the pin on the back here for the probably see it better if I do that. There we are, sticking out at the end. So it will, if you have an automatic diaphragm lens and camera body, it will still operate your iris automatically when you trip the shutter. Of course, on the Zenith with the Helios, it's a preset lens. There is no linkage between the camera body and the lens. So that's them. In my book, a useful accessory to have if you like doing your close-up photography, whether it is coins like I've used to illustrate this particular video, flowers, jewellery, anything like that. These are excellent. And of course, one thing worth bearing in mind, there is absolutely no glass in here. They're just empty metal tubes. So in theory, using these is not going to be detrimental to the performance of whatever lens you decide to use them in combination with. This piece of equipment is a teleconverter. Now, technically it's nothing to do with close-up photography, much less to do with close-up photography than increasing the focal length of any given lens that you combine it with. As you can see, this one again, Pentax Praktica M42 screw mounting, automatic diaphragm. This time, as opposed to the extension tubes, we've got glass elements in here. This particular example is made by Teleplus, which back in the day were acknowledged as being one of the better makers of converters. And this is a 2x teleconverter, which means it doubles the focal length of whatever lens you use it with. So if I screw it onto the front, onto the back even, onto the back of a Helios 58mm lens, that will become a 116mm. Compared to the extension tubes, which are simply circular metal tubes with no glass in them, the performance of teleconverters does depend on the standard of the glass elements that you put inside them. So it's always worth bearing that in mind. Camera manufacturers like Nikon and Canon do their own dedicated teleconverters. The idea, the thinking being that they can match the elements in the converter much more tightly to the elements in the lens that you're going to fit it to. But of course, they charge a premium for doing that. Again, this is something off the internet. I can't remember exactly how much it cost me, but if it was more than £10, I'd be amazed. They're very common, available in all sorts of fittings. Probably the most popular would be either M42 or the Pentax K bayonet fit, but they're certainly available for Minolta MD, Olympus OM fitting, and why I say these are also linked to close-up photography is that in this case with the 58mm, if we fit the two together, it converts it to a 118mm lens, but again the minimum focusing distance is unchanged, so it's doubling the size of the image you can get, but you're sticking with the same standard lens. So if we combine this with a 135mm lens, it would end up being a 270mm lens. And again, the bonus is that your close focusing distance remains exactly the same as marked on the lens. So they're good for two things really. One is close-up work because you're doubling the magnification, and the other of course is perhaps sports or nature photography. If you have a 200mm lens, screw this or bayonet this onto the back of it and it becomes a 400mm. So again, a nice little flexible addition to the gadget bag. Doesn't take up hardly any space. They usually come with a little holder. Slot it in, pop it up, and off you go. And the final image on this video today is one taken with this 2x teleconverter combined